Is everyone seeing the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, like I said, we really want to thank everyone for being here with us today. I'm Carrie Gaines, and I am the Director of Post-Award Compliance and Management. And Marsha Joyce is the Post-Award Associate Director, and we're both within the Sponsor Programs team. Marsha is the co-presenter for today's discussion. And we do hope to keep this just as a very informal discussion. We have a few slides and kind of some high points that we want to share with you on project management at ATSU. And then we'll open the floor for questions or comments. And we'll do our best to answer any questions that you might have. But like I said, we're really grateful that you're here with us, and we appreciate seeing so many familiar faces. Today, we're going to spend some time visiting about grants management and implementation at ATSU and how sponsored programs can be supportive of your efforts as a grant-funded principal investigator or project director. SP's post-award team is here to help you reconcile your funded project's aims and objectives with ATSU's policies and procedures and the funding source requirements to ensure that you have everything you need for a successful project and program implementation. So we're really kind of just kind of in your corner to help make sure everything that you need, you have to have a successful project. Now, once you reach this point as a principal investigator or a project director, you've already worked with Sponsor Programs pre-award team to develop and submit an application. They've worked with you to develop the budget, to ensure that the aims and the objectives and so on and so forth are within ATSU's scope. You've also worked with our award administration team to accept the award, get the grant account set up with the finance office, ensure that you have all of your certifications and assurances in place. And you're now at the implementation and management portion of the life cycle of the grant. The majority of the services that the post-award team for Sponsor Programs offers to project directors and principal investigators are in this phase of the grant life cycle. And within that, we're going to have a lot of initial kickoff startup activities. And then we enter into that implementation stage where you're doing the work of the project or the programming. We'll chat some more about reporting, which is also married to that implementation phase. And then we're going to talk about closeout. Now, before we even get there, I do want to say that in that implementation section, Marsha is going to spend some significant time on budget management and project changes, because the budget, managing the budget and spending compliantly at ATSU is one of the most risky project activities that we do. So we're going to spend a little bit of time there. So specific project kickoff activities vary from project to project, and they're dependent on your approved scope of work. And, you know, the kickoff activities are especially important if there was a significant time gap between when your grant application was submitted and when it was funded. And so we kind of see that sometimes we submit an application and it's 6 months or a year later and that project's getting funded. So the kickoff activities really serve as an opportunity to reorient yourself to the project, to get your project team in line and kind of figure out how you're going to make it happen. So critical steps include a careful review of your terms and conditions, ensuring that your project timeline is still valid, determining how often you should assemble your project team, make necessary staffing updates, whether that's creating or completing through the HR process an employee status form to do some salary offsets for existing staff, or if it's working with the HR team to post and hire for a new position that's funded within your grant. You know, you will also work heavily with sponsor programs if you have any partners or subawards required with your project. So the kickoff is the time to start getting those partners on board, completing any necessary agreements, those types of things. And at this stage, you also want to consider how you're going to proactively nurture that sponsor university relationship. you want to spend some time thinking about how you're going to interact with your funding source. Some folks expect a lot of interaction. Maybe they're having quarterly meetings or they have a conference or whatever the case may be. But really think about how you're going to keep your project in that sponsor's mind. Now, sponsor programs provides kickoff assistance we provide a kickoff email that outlines your budget, key ATSU policies that we think you need to be aware of in the context of your project. We're carefully reviewing the terms and conditions of your award. Just probably almost every time you reach out to us about your award, we're taking a quick run back through that award and also back through your budget, just to make sure we're keeping your project and all of its activities kind of in front of us. SP facilitates partner engagement through subaward agreements, consulting agreements, and contracts. So depending on the funding source of your project, your partner engagement could be pretty in-depth. We may need to have federal subaward agreements or federal consulting agreements and that type of thing. And they're pretty technical, but that's what we're here to help with. So again, that project launch is kind of how you determine whether or not you are ready to go on your project once it's funded. Project implementation centers on the achievement and the management of the funded program or the research protocol. Typically speaking, changes to the objectives and the aims are not permitted without prior approval of the funding source. SP service related to protocol or programmatic implementation, like the specific training program or the research program protocol, we're a little more removed from that. We're a little bit more peripheral. We're going to rely on the principal investigators and the project directors to lead the research, lead the training initiative, lead the service project. But we do provide significant support in both budget management and navigating project changes that require prior approvals. And this is where Marsha's going to kind of spend a bit more time providing an in-depth review of budget management and project changes at ATSU. Again, spending the funds is where we incur the most risk as an institution and where you will incur the most risk as a project director or a principal investigator. Marsha?
Thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone. While your award is the culmination of a competitive process, project compliance and performance are essential to positioning the university for future funding. ATSU is ultimately accountable for the use of the funds, and any incidents of misappropriation can impact future awards. Principal investigators, project directors, and project staff, in conjunction with Team SP, are responsible for complying with funder, ATSU policy, and regulatory directives. Upon award, the funder will send a notice of award along with terms of grant conditions accompanied by the approved budget. A notice of award comes in many forms, from an official document titled Notice of Award to a contract that must be assigned by an ATSU authorized official to an email from the funder congratulating you on your award. In some cases, the approved budget may differ from that submitted with the application. However, the only valid project budget is the one accepted by the funding source, containing all approved expenditure categories and line item allocations. Each budget contains direct costs and may or may not include indirect costs. Direct costs are costs which can be specifically attributed to a particular sponsored project and have been explicitly budgeted for and approved by the funder. Indirect costs are costs which are incurred for common or joint objectives and cannot be readily identified and specifically identified with a particular sponsored project. They are not expenses that can be incurred by the project team. The finance office has responsibility for incurring indirect costs. PI, PDs, and project staff must ensure all grant purchases are allowable project expenses. Expenditure allowability is set by the approved budget, funding agency guidelines, and institutional standards, and must meet all institutional and funder requirements. According to the Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB, a cost is considered allowable if it is reasonable, allocable to the project, and necessary to carry out the objectives of the project. To determine reasonability, we need to ask, would an objective individual not affiliated with the university agree that the cost is appropriate? Allowable costs are treated consistently with the use of generally accepted accounting principles in alignment with the requirements of the Uniform Administrative Guidance. In some cases, a cost could be allocable to both the grant and the department and should be split accordingly. In addition to adhering to the expenditure plan outlined in the approved budget, all expenses must be allowable and follow standard rules. ATSU has primary responsibility for managing and monitoring these funds. It is imperative that regulations and guidelines are satisfied at a number of tiers, depending on the funding source. For example, a federal grant must attain the strictest standards of institutional, agency, and OMB guidance. As such, all other guidance requirements are fulfilled by default. Timeliness is another goal that must be upheld to ensure that ATSU and all stakeholders in the project are in excellent standing with the funder. Fiscal accountability and timeliness in funder interactions or with other involved parties is crucial to avoid any negative impact on the institution, investigator, project director, or any potential future awards. All expenses must follow all relevant ATSU policies. Some of the policies we refer to frequently are reimbursement for travel expenses, purchasing policy and procedure, and hardware software procurement procedure. The most applicable policies will be referenced in the kickoff email that Carrie described previously. When it comes to expending funds, we follow either the ATSU policy or the funding source, whichever is more restrictive. For every month that a grant has expenditures, you will receive a monthly expenditure report. This report will be sent out by the grant accountant the following month. If there are no expenses, the report will be sent out quarterly. This report contains the budget categories. It lists current expenses, grant to date expenses, and the unexpended balance. Next slide, please. Frequently, prior funder approval is required if any budget category changes will exceed a specified percentage amount. Team SP will be the key resource in examining your budget and recommending what type of budget amendment request, if any, is appropriate. In this case, project implementation records must provide a solid rationale for any requested changes. The terms and conditions of expanded authority and what actions can be performed without prior approval differ for each funder. Team SP is a key resource in assisting project leaders to navigate and interpret expanded authority. Next slide, please. In some cases, it may become necessary and appropriate to initiate a request for additional time with or without additional funds. Requests for no-cost extensions are initiated by the PI, PD via Team SP. Requirements vary by grant mechanism and/or funding agency. However, most funding sources would discourage any type of extension if the purpose is simply to expend remaining grant funds. A programmatic need must be present. No-cost extensions may be an option when the project cannot be completed before the end of the performance period. Availability of a no-cost extension is dependent on the terms outlined in the notice of award. Carryover funds. Situations may arise when you may wish to carry over funds at the end of the grant period to continue or sustain project activities. Often a carryover request with supporting documentation is required to obtain funder permission to carry over funds. Funding renewals. For many federal and some non-federal funders, reports and/or other documentation are required to receive grant funds for subsequent project periods. Often a report, such as HRSA's non-competing continuation report, is required to detail grant progress of the previous project period. Now, Carrie will take you through a discussion of reports.
So project reporting is really a key piece of ensuring that we stay in the good graces of funding sources. There are some keys to managing reporting obligations, and that's going to be routinely and systematically monitoring and documenting your project progress, whether that's via data information and collection, whether it's through surveys and pre and post tests, or whatever your research protocol may include. It's important that you're monitoring and documenting. Those are kind of the two big words. The other thing is to ensure that your grant-related spending is in the approved budget categories and syncs with the performance of the approved project plan and research protocol. So if we see you getting deep into your project and you've not been expending the funds that were associated, we're probably going to be reaching out to you, because really funders are looking for those things to match up, for the spending to match with the implementation of the plan. And then the other kind of key project reporting strategy is to understand the specific terms and conditions associated with your award that tells you what reports are expected, what the timeline is, when are the reports due, that type of thing. Now, when it comes to project reporting, SP provides robust reporting support for principal investigators and project directors. We think this is an area that we really shine in and we want to be heavily involved. Grant reporting requirements can range from the simplest of formats, such as an informal email update. Even some foundation type funders even like to have a face-to-face update, like a meeting to update on your progress report. And then there's the complete other end of the spectrum. There are some funding sources that have highly formalized reporting requirements that are in a sponsor-specific electronic reporting system. Some funders require multiple reports, multiple types of reports. Some other funders are going to require a single report. It's important to understand that the award-specific terms and conditions are what's going to drive all reporting activities. In terms of supporting grant reporting, we provide support by tracking your reporting deadlines. We send reminders. We're available to develop templates and to assist with kind of crafting the story of your project. And when it's appropriate, and we have assigned post-award project managers to your project, we're even involved in drafting some sections of required reports. So depending on the type of project that you have and how much assistance you would like, we try to tailor our response and kind of meet each project director and principal investigator where they are. Sponsor programs does work closely with the finance office to develop required financial reports. Any financial report to an external source must be vetted through the finance office. So we're here to help assist and make sure that we have the appropriate approvals in place before those reports are submitted. We also provide quality assurance reviews. We'll take a look at your report and ensure that report submissions are responsive to the report guidance and the funder requirements. And we're even here to do submission support. There are plenty of project directors that prefer that SP push the big red button on their behalf, and we're happy to do those things and work directly with the project directors and principal investigators and their teams to ensure that all reporting obligations are met. So the next thing we're going to talk about is project closeout. So when a project ends, a project doesn't really end, okay? So you may finish your project, but the project isn't finished with you necessarily. So grants at ATSU are deemed ready for closeout activities on the date the grant budget period ends. Ideally, project teams with support from sponsor programs and the finance office are going to have the closeout in mind all along, but begin those technical closeout activities 45 to 60 days before the end of the grant period. So closeout activities include ensuring that all required reports, financial, progress, interim, performance, whatever the case may be, have been submitted or are scheduled to be submitted per the award-specific terms and conditions. We also have to make sure that all grant funds are fully obligated and accounted for in ATSU's accounting system in accordance with the approved budget and the project plan protocol, And we also require that, before we consider a grant closed, that we have that zero balance expenditure report from the finance office. Either we've spent all the money, we've returned all the money that we didn't spend, whatever the case may be, that we have closed the books on it within ATSU's accounting system. We're also going to work closely with you to ensure that all grant-related contracts, consulting agreements, subawards, any of those types of external agreements are appropriately closed, that all the documentation is collected, and all final invoices have been processed per institutional policy and procedure. We will identify and retain the required records per the funder terms and condition and ATSU policies and procedures. And if your project requires it, and we know that outcomes dissemination is pretty important to ATSU community members, you want to make sure that you've initiated your outcome dissemination efforts as described in the approved project plan. If we've said that we're going to publish articles, we need to be publishing articles if at all possible, or doing presentations, or developing a manuscript, whatever the case may be. Finally, and this is super important, and I know when everyone's done with their grant, they want to be done with their grant, but really take the time to critically evaluate how things went and share your relevant findings, lessons learned, and potential follow-up grant topics with the ATSU sponsor program's pre-award team. It's really never too early to start thinking about what your next grant application is going to be about. And we really like to ensure that we have that kind of 360-degree approach to the grant. So as we're finishing up your project and the post-award team is helping you to close things out, we're also going to be encouraging you to say, hey, this really great thing that you wrote about, have you gone and talked to the pre-award team about it? Make sure that we're continuing those relevant parts of your projects and your programs. So the post-award team has a fairly robust team. We have folks that are on both campuses. We have remote team members, and we're all available to assist you. And we kind of went over the very high points of what grant management looks like. But when it comes to the actual managing of your grant and implementing the programming, all of us here are available to you to help. And that can mean helping you figure out why your grant account is off by $5, or it can be, hey, we're not able to get into this hospital system until this date. Our project is going to be over before then. How do we make this happen? So we really spend a lot of time working with project teams to problem solve and troubleshoot. And we're just kind of always there to be assistive. And our goal is to meet you where you're at with your project and your project needs. Now, before we dive into questions, we wanted to remind everyone that the SP does have a portal page, and that you can get to that, and it will have a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of the post-award project implementation. It goes into more detail on some things, and we are looking to update our content. But with all of that said, are there any questions that we can answer for you or discussions?
Carrie, Marsha, just want to say you've done a great job here today. Who knew that grant administrators could also be talk show hosts? So great job. Maybe to start things off, what an appropriate question would be is that if someone hasn't administered a grant at ATSU before, hasn't been a project director here before, where's the best place for them to understand, how they need to get up to speed, what things they need to know about beyond your memo?
Sure. I think that one of the, of course, the quickest thing to do is to go ahead and go to the post-award page on the portal, this SP page, kind of look around and see what's going on there, and just reach back out to us. We will copy, when we send you your kickoff email, you will see that we've looped something called award management. And the award management email is composed of a cohort of post-award team members who are ready to jump in and work with you at any point in time. Another great place to look if you're having hyper-specific questions is to look to your funding source. NIH has an implementation guide. HRSA posts an implementation guide. A lot of the funding sources list their preferred implementation standards within the context of their source. Now, of course, we're here to help. We will help you dig through all of those things and come out the other side with a cogent, sound implementation plan. So. Other things that we take seriously, and it kind of sounds like it's a joke, but it's not, is we work really hard to make sure none of our project directors or principal investigators end up in grant jail. We work really hard to make sure that your projects, that you're able to do the things that you said you were going to do. And if you can't for any reason whatsoever, that we're helping you to troubleshoot that. If we see an expense that's even a little bit questionable, it's not that we're questioning you, it's that we're keeping your project compliant with the funding source and ATSU's policies. And sometimes it's not worth it to keep that $25 pasta maker on a grant, right? We probably need to figure out where it goes instead of, letting it drop there. So. Other questions?
There is a question in the chat from Laura. What percentage of ATSU grants are NIH or federally funded?
Wait, I don't have my metric sheet. Michelle, I see Michelle reaching for her metric sheet.
Oh, a rough guess is fine.
I am reaching. So if we look at the last fiscal year that ended June 30th, 21, about 84% of our grants were federally funded. The majority of those is within HRSA and the service and education sector. If we look at basic sciences, trying to look here at my metrics, we did have around $500,000 in basic science awards in that time period out of 7 million. So it's a smaller percentage that is NIH. But we also are seeing in the new climate that more of our project directors are putting forward NIH applications. There's some new opportunities that have kind of opened the doors, and we have more faculty pursuing those now.
Yeah, I've just started looking into the new 2023 data management and sharing policy. So I'm wondering how that's going to impact the library and our researchers and sponsored programs, et cetera. Have you looked into that at all?
I myself have not. Carrie, has your
Okay.
team been able to?
If not.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We could do that together. Thank
I'll
you.
jot it down, Laura.
Yes.
Other questions or concerns or thoughts? No questions too big, no questions too small. We'll do our best.
Carrie, I have a question for you. Real quick. First off, it was a fantastic presentation. I got to learn so much about post-award. Hence why I signed up to join, because I really needed to get on that and get a better in-depth feel of the other side of grant administration. My question for you would be, when I'm on the pre-award side, writing up an application, and I'm still, I would say, relatively new, and I need some help on a certain section. Is there an area in post-award that you think is especially helpful to pre-award in the application process? If I have a question about a budgetary process or maybe an underserved population number, are there specific grant guidelines that I could reach out to post-award about that they would be more inclined to help me with?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say that we'll help with anything. If there's a question, we'll be willing to go back and look through everything. But oftentimes the progress reporting is going to feed heavily into the pre-award side. We can talk a lot about what went well in a project and what didn't work so well. And I would say that, we all work pretty closely across the board. When we know that you're going for a specific funding source, we're going to be pulling in what we know about that funding source from the post-award perspective, from successfully implemented programs. For instance, if you're going to start working on, a St. Louis Senior Fund application, well, we're going to we're going to be looking at what Patty and her team's already done and what was successful and what was well received by that team. A lot of times, if we're able to work closely with project directors, and like I said, we meet project directors where they are, we can have the inside track sometimes on what that funding source is thinking or what their applications, what might be some unspoken things that are coming through in their applications. Like we may see, oh, they're putting that in there and we think it has to do with this based on some feedback they gave us, or they announced in their last meeting that under no circumstances were they going to do X, Y, and Z again, and that's why it's not in there. So just being able to provide maybe some of that boots on the ground perspective, our post-award team can do that too.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great answer, and that's really good to hear. Sometimes it's easy to forget that a lot of the places we've applied to previously, and post-award has already handled that award dissemination. So it's great to remember and a great reminder. Thank you.
But I think Patty's going to keep that St. Louis Senior Fund pretty tight control over that funding source, right, Patty?
Only if you keeping track of the funds for me. That's and helping with the writing. I can attest to how wonderful they are to help us through the whole process. And I don't think we could not have been as successful as we've been without your help. So I'm here as the kudos support person to say thank you very much.
I think one of the things that maybe the post-award team does super, super well is we really want to absorb as much of the administrative burden for grant-related tasks as is reasonable, within our scope, in our charge. We can't absorb HR burden, but we can help with some different things so that the project teams are freed up to really focus on their research, to focus on their project implementation, whatever the case may be, that piece where we don't have the expertise. I see Dr. Chuma's on here. We're not all integrated behavioral health specialists. We need to protect her time around that project so she can focus on those things and we can focus on the award agreements or whatever the case may be. So.
And you do that so well, Carrie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a personal question, Carrie. I'm talking about the PCORI grant Dr. Menke had, and remember the small grant. And I remember there were a lot of issues with implementation that you personally pulled us out of and helped us through. And just like wondering whether there is an opportunity for researchers to have a sit down with a post-award to learn from their mistakes and maybe, not repeat them again.
Sure, absolutely. We're always available to sit down and meet with folks. I think that one thing that I would say when it comes to projects that have a rougher start or they hit a rough patch or whatever the case may be, I think there is an inclination to think that it's the only project that's happened to, or that's the only project that it's ever going to happen to, or it's the only project that it is happening to at any given moment. And I would say that project management and research protocols of all sorts at ATSU, we're talking about working in a very dynamic environment. There can be a big gap between when your project when you submitted to get your project and when you get it. And you can essentially be trying to implement, a project or a protocol in an institution that doesn't look the way it did, 12 months ago or whatever the case may be. I think the biggest advice to any researcher or project director that the post-award team would advocate for is if you see a problem, say it, and we can start looking at how we can come up with a way to address the particular issue within your project and your program in a way that's compliant. And we know that there will be 998 ways that it won't work, but we just have to get our heads together and figure out a couple of ways that we can move past any issue. So we really pride ourselves on being solution oriented. We know that projects and programs are going to encounter issues, often not at all of their own making. We just have to figure out how to work through them. So we're always willing to sit down and have those types of hard conversations if we need to.
Thank you. We appreciate you very much.
other questions or insights or anything additional?
I would just back up that in my experience, Team SP does find the 2 ways that makes it work. And there are, I mean, I have run into so many difficult situations, but there's always a solution. Even when I thought there wasn't one, we were able to talk it through and find one. So I'm so grateful for that.
We're really happy to do it. And that's why we spend so much time working in the policies and the procedures and the funding guidelines. You know, we kind of start to figure out where we need to go and who we need to talk to, and we can get to those solutions and answers quicker while the project directors and principal investigators are still doing the work. I mean, the work still keeps going while these other things are happening. So we try to keep those other things, you know, running in the background to the extent possible. So. It looks like we could end a little bit early, and not to be too much of a comedian, but the second best thing to a canceled meeting is a session that ends a little bit early. But we don't want to cut off anybody if they have any other questions or observations, or if we could ask any other, you know, look into something else for you, please let us know. But otherwise, we won't hold people on unnecessarily. 22 extra minutes.